He's worked with everyone over the years. From Meat Loaf to Patti Smith and back, leaving behind a legacy of new ideas, and fans praise his bravery. But there is conflict artistry. Some of the biggest names in music. Bruce Springsteen, enough is enough of him. He once said that Bat Out of Hell was a joke about Kanye West's whole career. Rundgren said, he was a loose cannon with someone with stupid money who doesn't know how to make a real album, and that's all. Here are three legendary music artists who are sick of Todd Rundgren and the trouble going on behind the scenes that made them fight. Let's talk about John Lennon. When snide remarks turned mean. It's not true that John Lennon was a revolutionary. A fucking idiot for saying that. Todd Rundgren fired one of the harshest public photos in the history of rock and roll feuds. What started out as a friendly interview for Rundgren's 1974 book album, Todd quickly grew into a well-known war of words across the Atlantic between two of the most vocal 20th century artists who played at the when John Lennon was in the middle of his changes in craft after the Beatles albums with political themes like Sometime, to New York City to fight for peace with Yoko Ono, and fighting immigration to the U.S. people who were trying to send him away. His image as an activist for peace rock star was both praised and made fun of. And for Run It, anger at hypocrisy in a Melody Maker. Rundgren was interviewed. Put it down, all he wants to do is get attention for himself. If revolution gets him the attention he wants, revolution getting a lot of attention. What kind of waitress work in the Troubadour? What is that revolution? Runs asks. Stung that John Lennon had been drunk temper tantrum at the Troubadour nightclub in 1974, he wore a sanitary pad on his head and called him names. Staff. The event became well known and was critics used it to show how Lennon's having problems. A man who preached peace and love while having problems with alcohol and anger. But Run didn't end there, he said. Lennon to Richard Nixon, calling both people who represent broken ideals. Nixon was just like the men of another era. John Lennon was a person who stood for all kinds of ideals, but he only cared about himself. Under all of that, he said maybe his line was the most cutting of all. Getting rid of the Beatles musical. The Beatles didn't have any style. Besides being the Beatles, the statements were an impossible provocation. Just weeks later, Lennon didn't care about wrote a famous open letter to Sodal. Stuntel is a made-up name for Todd Rundgren. In his famous style, Lennon replied with sarcasm, I guess. We all want your attention, Rod. Are you sure I don't know how to get? I could dye my hair without revolution. For starters, dye your hair pink and green. It was clear from Lennon's letter that public humiliation that looks like a joke. He said Rundgren had problems with his dad. It looked like Rundgren had stolen Beatles songs and tore Runs apart. The Nas used to do things like heavy rock, and then all of a sudden a light pretty ballad. How the first Lennon defended he knew himself, but he also saw his flaws. He admitted that he was a jerk at the Troubadour and made fun of Rundgren's people who don't like his style, saying, which brings me to the Beatles, who didn't have any other style rather than being the Beatles. That a lot of style, man, including yours. Date. The letter was made public in Making Melody Maker in September 1974, one of the most amazing song stories of the year. Readers took sides. Not everyone agreed on who was right, but both artists had bared their nerves about being real, taking responsibility, and the stresses of public life on Rundgren. The feud was partly a plan. He had a new album to promote, and what better way to get more attention than to prick a bug? Still, the hate speech was really nasty. Truthfully thought that Lennon's persona had become too different from his private things, and he said it so loudly. After many years, Rundgren explained his reasons. When you go on interviews, if you want to get people to make the world a better place, need to have a certain amount of trustworthiness, and if you're out, they were drunk and making out with women. For peace, you need to do the following: clean up your act, Lennon said. Going through his own internal reckoning during this time, years after involvement in politics, personal loss, and he was almost dead from drug abuse. What people called his lost weekend, an 18-month breakup with Yoko Ono marked by drinking, partying, and acting badly. And this was the time when Lennon building walls and bridges and getting back in touch with his son Julian. In many ways that Rundgren's accusations hit a nerve because they weren't fully, even though they fought in public. Rundgren they would go on to perform with as a member of the all-star band Ring, or a bit of an ironic twist considering the strength of his criticism of Lennon, when they were asked about the contradiction, Run said that he could keep personal fights separate from respect for their work, but the Lennon-Run feud took a very creepy turn. 1980, when John Lennon was killed outside of the Dakota his Mark David's home in New York City, Chapman, the tragedy shocked everyone. But for Run, it came with a surprise and a scary turn as the police dug into a lot of strange things happened in Chapman's life. And chilling connections came to light. It turned out that Chapman had been a fervent fan of Todd Rundgren the night of the murder. December 8, 1980. Chapman was dressed in a Todd t-shirt from the Rundgren concert, and one of the things that were found in his hotel room, a copy of Rundgren's 1972 album, was in the room. Something Anything, the headline said it all. Rundgren's, because of no fault of his own, his name was now being tied down, but by chance, to one of the worst crimes in music history that people are already looking for. There was meaning in Lennon's senseless death began to look at every thread for no reason. What a weak link that one of Chapman's obsessed with music was a man who had previously spoken out against Lennon added a creepy interest to the speculation about stories spread especially among fans who believe in conspiracies that it's possible that Chapman had been affected by what Rundgren said, or they made things worse, but they weren't credible. Rundgren and Chapman have never been linked. Besides the latter's fans, Chapman never used Rundgren as an excuse. Neither did he talk about the fight in any of his interviews or writings. His main interest with The Catcher in the Rye, and his people who thought Lennon was fake, were proven and much more important in shaping his crazy view of the world. Even now the connection made me very uncomfortable. Run himself, when he was asked about the event in a 2009 classic rock movie interview, showed how uneasy he was, and it seems that sympathy after Lennon was killed. The police found a copy of If I Left one of my albums at Chapman's hotel. I've never talked to him, and you don't think there's any proof that the little spit me and John had in any way on Mark Chapman? I'm not sure. After being sure he knew about it, he went on to say that while the incident had briefly haunted him, he eventually agreed that it was a sad event, random event. I felt weird about the t-shirt thing. He said it, but John Lennon was the world's most well-known person, that he would have found some kind of darkness with or without me. During the years that after that, Rundgren made it clear that Lennon's legacy was deeply respected, despite he often talked about their past in interviews. Of how great Lennon was as a singer, his cultural importance, and the deep loss that his death meant, while Rundgren was still critical of some parts of Lennon's public image. The tone had gotten kinder, and the fight had been going on for a long time. Passed into the history of rock music, colorful, fiery, and ultimately human. However, Lennon's death caused a terrible, it had a finality that words could not change. But the strange thing stayed. Chapman, a man who would quote Holden Caulfield and read Bible verses while you wait to kill one of the most loved people in the world. Artists had also picked Todd Rundgren as the music that drove him crazy. Bruce Springsteen, the album that made fun of the boss. I didn't make Bad Out of Hell because I loved it, Todd Rundgren snapped. I did it to make you, making fun of Bruce Springsteen. It wasn't a joke. It was war. A lot of time before Bad Out of Hell became one of the most popular albums in music history. 14 times before it went platinum, before it turned the Meatloaf into a worldwide hit. It was a satire, a parody, and it was clear who it was meant to hurt. Bruce Springsteen is what people in America call it. Was true that he saved rock and roll. It's annoying to me, Rundgren said. The Billboard said that Bruce Springsteen was being called the rock and roll savior role. You know, he was on the front of I read Time magazine and thought this music was great. Springsteen isn't going anywhere. To Run didn't move things forward, he went backwards. Even though Bruce Springsteen would show that they are still real. Run laughed at the icons that were still not in back in the 1950s, you know, switchblades and bikes, leather jackets, and that kind of crap. This wasn't just a review, the whole thing was thrown out. Springsteen's whole style is racy. Didn't see the truth in Born to Run. He saw costume act out, a leather-clad, making fun of a time period that rock should have grown out of it by now, when it was Meatloaf and Jim Steinman who brought him. Their dramatic op-ed project was one that featured wailing vocals that were over-the-top tales and a thunderous, almost drawn-out look at teenage lust and rebellion. Rundgren had a realization about this. Knew that was the best weapon to use in spite of Springsteen's lie. I saw the whole show as a parody of, he said, Bruce Springsteen, and that's why I chose to do it. but Run's goal was to make fun of his boss. He might have made a mistake not many people saw. Bat Out of Hell, satire. It was accepted and ate it up, was a hit right away, but no one seemed to catch the irony, and not the fans, not the critics, not it seems like Bruce himself. But I've never really talked to Bruce after that, Run said. I've run into him once, or we've been backstage twice, but we haven't had much time. I think he's ready to talk about. They don't know that it's a parody of he, but the similarities could not be denied. Max Weinberg and Roy Bittan from the East the Street Band played on the album The Sack. Clarence Clemens screamed solos. The writing songs was filled with the same Americana movies, only Bat Out of Hell turned everything up to 11, and then I thought we were going to rebuild. Rock and roll from the start, oh my. I didn't remember any runs, so when I saw Meat Loaf, this is a parody of Bruce Springsteen, which is why I didn't care if it worked or not. I didn't mean to be mean to Bruce Springsteen. Oh, did it work? The album was put together on a very tight budget, were turned down by all the big labels and made fun of by business leaders, went on to sell more than 43 million copies around the world, and Rundgren, who had to cover the recording at first costs, took a royal reward and left. Nearly $800,000 check. The main idea behind the Bat Out of Hell story is a revenge fantasy that went wrong, became a legend. Randy was upset by the idea of making Springsteen wholly out to make fun of the myth, and for that Steinman made a new one by accident, and Meat Loaf weren't always on board with it. The joke that no one knew they were runners said they were just being spoofed, going about their business, but I cast Max and Roy so they could bring that. Fans of the project should be springy about it. Rundgren thought it was just great music. Sentence. Rock doesn't need one more pair of blue jeans. Prophet preaching about thunder wrote it needs a sweaty beast that acts too much going down it on a burning automobile no matter how much he talks. Rundgren liked the craft. He praised Steinman is good at making you feel like adding humor to the text in a way that no matter where Bruce played, Springsteen never did. Bat Out of Hell took pleasure in it straight up. It was absurdity that Rundgren saw as progress. It was honest in the way it lied. Of course, the irony is that while a lot of people thought of Springsteen's work as serious writing and an honest portrait of working-class America, Bat Out of Hell, they became timeless by not taking itself seriously. It was crazy, camp, broken, and definitely fun. So what does, after decades, what does it all mean now? Springsteen never answered. He never said through shade, but he never agreed with the parody. Maybe he didn't even notice, he didn't care, or maybe he did. Saw what Rundgren saw, but from a different view of what Run saw. Springsteen used nostalgia as an anchor to see it saved his life, and Run tried to torch the past. Springsteen built a singing it back to life for a living in this way. The unintended result is this: the two will always be linked, as the poet of the open road and the other as the producer who took a jab and made it a juggernaut. Kanye West and the DA mess that has a lot of junk on it. Todd Rundgren's harsh decision about DA Kanye 10th studio album by Kanye West, but this wasn't. It was just a quick criticism. The angry roar of a famous producer been caught in the eye of an artist. Hurricane Rundgren is used to being in studio chaos after making records for decades to make Hall & Oates, Patti Smith, Meat Loaf, and more. Had seen a lot, but not like he didn't hide this. He's a shoe designer. He's just wasting time on this point that most people would never make records like that unless they were stupid. You had real money to throw around. Oh, that was Todd Rundgren, leaving one being one of the most talked about music that is ultimately confusing. Ren's projects of the decade becoming involved with DA began in. To be honest, the famous producer was brought into the circle of Kanye West by 88 Keys, a respected work partner of West's and a Rundgren fan for a long time. Rundgren later, 88 Keys is a great guy. Had a strong desire for us to work together at first. That hope didn't last. Rundgren was willing to listen to any gospel after going through painful divorces. He didn't mind the subject. If you can sing about Jesus if you want to. I don't care what you want to sing about, I'll also help you do that with your wife. Epic classic rock was told what he did. Kanye's mind was left in the dark. Would call him over and over and ask for making vocal contributions but never giving up clarity. Run said that he was driftwood floats in the water through a sea of files without knowing if any of it would be heard or used. I kept getting calls to add vocals. Said but don't hear back from many. people from him about what it is. In the end the ridiculousness got worse. I have 3 songs by Kanye West that are on my Rundgren admitted on the computer, but still no clear direction, no plan, and definitely not finished product of what Run found. There was no art behind the scenes. Genius. It was a mess. Kanye was essentially getting a record from a lot of people. Dozens of producers, singers, and musicians often don't explain the Run wasn't the only one left. Chris Brown's Soulja was lost or confused. In the end, boy. And even Andre 3000 Show Your Anger at being cut from the album after writing verses for it. But West kept holding on to listening parties in huge stadiums, calling controversial figures such as Marilyn Manson and the Baby to the stage, and Live coming from a room where he was seen to sleep while lifting weights or pacing. It wasn't so much an album rollout than a piece of art or a breakdown. Who you asked said that Rundgren saw through the show to him, wasn't it was a reaction to an album in particular. In response to Drake, he quickly wrapped the whole thing and put out what is obviously really raw, unprocessed stuff. Run told the news crew, it's because Drake was in charge of the whole thing. Kanye too scared that Drake would beat him, so he rushed it out, which made him bloated. It's an uneven 27-track collage that starred everyone from Playboy to Jay-Z Cardi, but still felt like it wasn't good enough in the end. Run joked that Drake ate his lunch to Todd Rundgren anyway. What wasn't Kanye's goal, it was the Run with no musical intent. He was a studio perfectionist who layered vocals by hand. Back when music was analog, almost all of the instruments in his solo, he turned Bat Out of Hell into a rock opera when other people thought it was just he thought DA looked more like a joke, though. A mess dressed as Mystique. Run saw it as a very bad example of how clout works. Chasing and the way social media looks had taken over musical integrity that no one rents as a place to set a record. He made fun of no one flies in the whole world of hip-hop just to whisper one sound so you can say that everyone is on it. Run wasn't. He was mad at Kanye's subject matter. Mad at the method or lack of it. There's a chance I'm in there. He said something about DA. There's that record had a lot of junk on it, but this wasn't it. This was a fight between 2 musicians. Generational differences in culture and ideas. This divide. Run is a careful world full of analogs where records are made like symphonies. Kanye stands for a digital world that is broken up and records are put together like playlists, and releases show art, which is what Kanye called setting new limits. Rundgren saw as laziness dressed up as new ideas. He's not a Rundgren said he's a musician no longer. Brand, this feeling is shared by many others. Complaints about Kanye West's later work. A change from focused art. I dropped out of college, my beautiful dark, from twisted fantasy to random provocations. Alliances that make headlines and spiritual themes are becoming less clear. While West once used trouble to raise his art, Rundgren thought he was now using art to get ahead. Trouble, and in the eyes of with a veteran like Rundgren, that's the cardinal sin. Had Kanye never answer to Rundgren's jabs, but that's nothing new for him. Hardly ever responds directly to criticism. They would rather bulldoze through it with a different project and lead line something else that changes who he is. Didn't need Run to finish but he did. What may have been lost in the process, something more valuable. Respect from artists who used to admire him have stopped. Left disillusioned, but he wasn't defeated, so he went back to touring. To writing and saying what he thought. He was even made fun of for possibly still being buried in the chaos of the album. There is a ghost. I might be in the machine there. He shrugged and said, God help me so. What do you believe about Todd Rundgren? Smart person who tells it like it is, or a musical threat that's too many bad feelings between you and Kanye? The chaos of Kanye West to Bruce Springsteen's legacy and past. Rundgren's shockingly being honest has left a trail of the music world is tense because which side are you on? Tell us in the